This is an SKS. This is a Bullpup. And this is an SKS Bullpup.
This is a certified white monster class.
Now you may be wondering, admin, why are you showing me this abomination of a weapon? Well, the answer is simple, really. It's my channel and I can do as I please. Now with the pomp and circumstance out of the way, we're taking a look at this little firearm because I think it's neat. It perfectly captures a time of civilian firearms ownership, and I like it because it dances dangerously on certain trains of thoughts that I find fascinating. A brief SKS history lesson. I, of course, am no fan of communism, but game recognizes game. The commies of the Soviet Union made some absolutely banger firearms. To be fair, you would need some pretty good guns if you expect to steal everyone's private property. I say try that in America, try it here. You're gonna need space lasers to pull it off. World War II brought about a massive technological leap in innovations on all fronts, especially in small arms. The Soviets were seeking to improve firepower outputs of their troops just like any nation would. A gun known as the SKS, designed by Sergei Simonov, came about and was adopted by the Soviet military, chambered in a 7.62x39 round. Now there is some chatter that I came across during my low-level academic research of this subject that talked about Soviets of the First Belarusian Front getting issued the SKS for testing purposes. These were pressed into service during the final months of World War II. To be brutally honest, it's unsure to me if these saw combat whatsoever. It is an interesting thought though, and I think it's a fun little plausibility, right? If they're on a fighting front and knowing the Soviets with their martial spirit, could they have ended up being used against the Germans? I couldn't find any photos, sadly. If you do know for sure out there, please leave a comment, that'd be kind of fun. Now the First Belarusian Front recommended the SKS be pressed into service under the name of the SKS-45. But as we all know, the Kalashnikov of the AK-47 variant would eclipse the SKS's star and be the go-to rifle of the Soviet Army for quite a while until it was replaced by the AK-74. Now there were still a plenty amount of SKSs built both by the Russians and by all of their licenses that was throughout the communist influence world. And wherever the communist influence was had, it seemed that the SKS was there also, popping up through conflicts all throughout the Cold War and even on after the Cold War. I swear to God I saw like a SKS with a scope of some kind being used by the Russians in the war in Ukraine. The SKS on the American market. Millions of SKSs would flood the American market and to be bought at a relatively low cost in firearms terms. For many, the SKS was often a first gun, and it's kind of a cool thing to see. You can get a relatively affordable, semi-practical weapon, and it has some fun ties to history. Now, with the massive amount of SKSs on the market came a massive aftermarket. An aftermarket of customization, that is. Stocks, chassis, ways to mount optics all became very popular to get the most bang for your buck out of your cheap little SKS that you got for pennies on the dollar. Now, the particular firearm I'm showing off to you today is an SKS with an SG Works chassis. It turns it into a bullpup configuration. In my research for all this, I found an interesting blog post from the website welikeshooting.com. I think the author of this blog, his name on the website was Savage One. Oh, wow. That's kind of sick. Kind of dope, dude. Savage One actual. Now in this article, the author Savage One was looking for a way to turn his musket of an SKS into something a little bit more practical. And he came across a promotional video from July 9th, 2009 from SG Works, showing off their chassis for the SKS that they built. And it was built to fit a wide number of SKS platforms. The video is actually kind of fun to watch. It's an interesting point in time for firearms marketing and for YouTube too. 2009 is still very much a YouTube infancy thing. And that point in time really does capture how popular I think SKSs were. At least from my recollection, I was still pretty young. I was starting to enter those teenage years. If I ever came across a conversation about firearms, it seemed like everyone always had an SKS, or they were somehow young guys' first guns because they weren't as unwieldy as a Mosin, ammo was cheap, it was slightly practical, and it was kind of cool. And then there was this whole renaissance where people were trying to get their SKS to be as practical as possible. Also in the video, I love the guy's optic height. He's like way ahead of his time. because it looks like the optic is just extremely high up there. So if he was doing some sort of passive aiming with nods, that's kind of sick, dude. It's kind of dope. Savage One in his article would then go on to say how SG Works had its issues getting tooled up with all the proper equipment to make the chassis, having issues with the mold kits and stuff like that, and eventually they would work it out. In his article, he said they really went through the brutality that comes with not fulfilling orders in business, which is always a big no-no, but they managed to survive, and the chassis at the time was going for $200 to $230, depending on the accoutrement that you got with the kit. All said and done, I think the chassis, from what I see, is actually not too shabby and holds up. You know what else holds up? This video sponsors. Of all my attempted segues, that is one of them. We have to give a big thank you to Americana Apparel.com, fantastic young Zoomers with all of the good milsurp drip and equipment, night vision knives, e-bikes, manuals, and a bunch of cool milsurp drip to keep you kitted and fitted to LARP extra hard in your mother's basement. Link for them, of course, and all the other sponsors. We'll have a link in the description down below. Optics Planet being the optics sponsor of Administrative Results. Big thank you to those guys. And we have to give a massive thank you to Badlands Ammo, keeping the ammo train running. They technically didn't sponsor us with 7.62x39, but they are the ammo sponsor of the video and the channel, so big thank you to those guys. I appreciate them very much. Now, the particular gun here I got from my LGS. I walked in, I was perusing and looking for fun guns that I either wanted to show off or add to my collection, and I saw this thing on the wall, and the longer I stared, the more I liked it, because it is just a weird abomination, and I knew that it's kind of like the pinnacle of the Bullpups SKS, where it's the elite shock trooper variant of the Bullpups SKS. And to be fair, it actually holds up with a pretty decent aesthetic. Like, looking at it, it has a really good sci-fi look to it, and of all the Bubbafying of SKS that I saw, I was very impressed by it, and it was pretty cheap in relative terms, all said and done. I think I paid around like $500 for it. Now, the barrel, it looks like to have a chopped pin and weld going on. When I measured it, my guess was the barrel length itself is around 15 inches, and then the muzzle device on it gives it the overall length of 16 inches to not make it an NFA firearm. The overall length of the weapon is 27 inches, which is pretty wieldy, I will say. As far as bullpup goes, all the weight is in the rear, making it feel how a bullpup would feel. The magazine catch back here, I will give it props. It actually works relatively well. Struggle slightly. All things considered, right? My expectations were low, and they were, for the most part, all met. There was a demonstration I saw from the original video from SG Works from 2009 where after the rounds in the magazine were complete, this top cover would pop open and you had the option of loading the gun with stripper clips. The previous owner seems to have some sort of catch, so that doesn't happen because it is more magazine orientated with these Pro Mags, 20 round Pro Mags, because I'm YouTube compliant and it's the only mags I got. I wasn't gonna buy more mags for this because it's kind of like a funny meme gun. So we filmed a little bit out of order. We did some shooting and we did some talking, then we did some more shooting. And then as we did the more shooting part, after we filmed the talking, I incurred a malfunction. I also lost my pec along the way. But I incurred a malfunction where I remember talking about this top latch, how the previous owner somehow rigged it up to, and I'm totally not 100% familiar with the SG Works chassis, so that also could be it. But during the shooting, it stayed closed, and I thought the design was originally that it stayed closed like this until it was empty, then it would pop open, giving you the option for stripper clips. But mine wasn't doing that, but eventually it just broke, and now it popped open, and all the malfunctions we were having during the first shooting part pretty much stopped, as now the ejection port wasn't as obstructed as it was before. Now it actually works, despite the horrible aesthetic and how close the bolt reciprocating is to my face, it actually works pretty decently well now, which is kind of funny. Who knows, we had to break it to fix it. It would absolutely put a dirty commie into the ground if they came into the sights of my Space SKS, but I made it one word, Space Cassis. You got your safety right here. Right now you're firing, now you ain't. Relatively decent safety, like it does the job. On some of the kits, there were attachments where you could screw on Picatinny up here, and I don't have that. I just have the top rail. Then we have the Mepro light red dot. That kind of has that also sci-fi look to it. It's rather appropriate. The trigger has, I believe, a tampered wire running from the front trigger to the firing device in the back over here. And I will say there was a sketchy moment in shooting this where I didn't have my finger on the trigger and I manipulated the gun somehow. And of course the muzzle was downrange because I'm a master of safety, and it cooked off a round. Maybe that's why the previous owner got rid of it. That's showbiz, baby. I risked my life for you boys. I risked the cameraman's life for you boys. Everyone say thank you, Colton. Can you hear the collective typing, Colton? Okay. Despite the gun's negligent discharge of trying to get me killed and or in a massive lawsuit after I smoked my camera guy, it was still hella mid. I was getting some malfunctions from a fully loaded magazine, and I think the gun may be finicky in some aspects. I wouldn't put the blame on the chassis, but I would still have to take that into consideration. I don't know which SKS this is built upon, but it has like the polymer furniture on that SKS, so who knows? The mouthfeel. The mouthfeel is actually pretty exquisite. The concept. The SKS is of course an outdated firearm, but I still think it has some level of practicality today. Now, as a student of institutions, I like the idea of certain concepts. One concept was the PDW concept that was brought about thanks to the Cold War, and some could technically argue even sooner with World War II and the mass adoption of the M1 carbine. That being said, the idea was something with more stopping power than a pistol and more lethal than a pistol, but much more wieldy than the main battle rifle of whatever the Army was using. For World War II, it was the M1 Garand, and then they had the M1 carbine. For the Cold War era, all the submissions like the P90 and the MP7 that would be smaller, lethal, yet way more wieldy than, say, a full-size M16. And I think there's a weird like niche for something like this, given the history of the SKS, how it was kind of pushed upon those that needed to carry a gun but weren't expected to go into the full frontal breach of an all-out war. You know, guys like border guards, prison guard, logistical guys, I could see all having SKSs. One thing that I was playing with was a notion of, say if a country had a lower GDP. Like if there was a poor country with lower GDP, but maybe at some point was under the Soviet influence and had stockpiles of a massive amount of SKSs, and they wanted to have like a better military backbone, the thought of an SKS bullpup chassis kind of makes sense if I'm playing with it, you know what I mean? Like the whole chopped overall length, 27 inches, maybe you have some spare ammo on you, but you're an artillery guy or a truck driver, so whatever logistical role, you got to guard like a checkpoint, but all the ground pounders are off fighting. I think it kind of fits into that niche. If I was expected to do any of that and they gave me this thing, I would be kind of pissed, but you know, that's just life when you are a poor country. Of course, another scenario that was in my head was the ever infamous SHTF scenario that seemed to have, and still does, a massive death grip on the minds of many gun owners. Totally understandable. Do what you gotta do. Prep hard, baby. And the idea was, in this SHTF scenario, in my head, I was jockeying for peak warlord status. And if I was going to equip my warlord nation and really get myself on the stage, I would need some peak weaponry. I don't need to arm everyone to the teeth. And if you have your own armament, that's great. But the idea was, I have my farmers and agricultural wing that are not expected to fight. At the worst case, they'll have Mosins. And then with my logistical guys, you can all give them SKSs, and maybe the more militia style troops could have SKSs. And in this sense, if you have a bullpup SKS, you can get a little bit more bang for your buck, and those guys might be a little bit more well prepared. And then of course my elite shock troopers would be as armed with the modern stuff as possible. Now it's all like a fun war game in your head, but I fear that it would all crumble instantly under the weight of the FPV drone. It's my LARP in my head. I can do whatever I want, dude. In conclusion, now, realistically, all said and done, the SKS has been truly phased out of the mind of the self-defense orientated civilian. I think they still have their place in collections, and I think a bullpup chassis may make a SKS slightly more viable in a self-defense scenario, but realistically, the AR-15 and how cheap they've become have eclipsed it for that style of role. There's another thing where I would say that the bullpupping of SKSs is kind of funny and neat, but ultimately they would never be as good as they could be in theory because there's just no money there. The super experienced firearms engineers that really push the envelope all know trying to make a bullpup chassis is not going to get them a freaking sick yacht. So the money just isn't there, and the platform is rather dated, and you can probably build a bullpup around something much more reliable. That being said, I think it is funny. I think it's kind of a meme, and it kind of makes an interesting video because it yet again represents a fascinating point in civilian firearms culture here in the United States, where everyone was trying to bubbify their SKS to be as tactical as possible. To me, the SKS also has some fun history, and I think combining those two is a fun overlap. Gentlemen, if you enjoyed this video, I appreciate it greatly. Who knows where you are watching this from, drinking your coffee, eating your beer, glued to the toilet, and hopefully by now your legs have fallen asleep where you have to call the fire department to pry you off. To all of you that watch this, and my mom, hi Mom, thank you very much. Got nothing else for you. Catch you guys on the flip. Are you satisfied? Are you happy? Are you Admin's happiest little camera guy?